Well, I'd like to congratulate everyone for making it to 4:30. That's something that I can hardly do some of these days. So I am Gabe Mouritsen. I'm a senior cybersecurity engineer at Agio. Agio is a managed IT and cybersecurity services business. We specialize in XDR, open XDR, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I really want to talk about building your XDR stack, the collection of things that you put together that help you have the capability to detect and respond to cyber threats. So just a tiny bit of background on me. I've been working with managed service providers, IT, and MSSPs and cybersecurity for about 8 years now, sort of warming my way through the industry. I've recently gone back and done my master's at SUU. I see a couple classmates. Master's in cybersecurity and information assurance. So with that and my experience with MSSPs, I've had the opportunity to see how a lot of different companies, potentially hundreds of different companies, compile their stacks for the capability of XDR. And I've been directly involved in many of those, so I feel like I have a sort of unique perspective on this. I've also been yelled at by plenty of CISOs. I feel like that's pretty important here as well, so I'm sure you guys feel that. So whether you call them MSPs or MSSPs or MDRs or XDR, infosec, or just the security people, they make a huge difference on how effective your security posture can be because they're compiling your stack. So what we try to do at Agio is we try to extract the value of all those different products and integrate them together and give you this is painful to say, single pane of glass. Because we have to have that because we're a service provider. We already have that. That's like how you do one-to-many service, provide one-to-many services. So let's move on. It's not moving on. There we go. So here's the elephant in the room. What even is XDR? What does that mean? Well, it stands for Extended Detection and Response. Is it like the buzzword of the year? I know a lot of antivirus companies are marketing their next-gen AV as, some kind of catch-all XDR that goes into, everything. My brother works for CrowdStrike, for instance, and it looks like they're trying to expand into this, into the void left by other, maybe not so great ideas, like SOAR. You could put that in a different product. A lot of these things you can put in different products, and that's exactly what CrowdStrike and Carbon Black are trying to do. They would call that native XDR, one product to rule them all. But even such a thing would need to connect into different things. They're not on your network. They don't have network taps. I think we'll be calling it something else by the time the EDR vendors are truly XDR. So what about MSSPs? They've sort of been doing this for a while, already integrating your different products. It's just the challenge with that is it was always more of a product-specific and contract-specific, sort of pigeonhole everything into one space because that's how you do contracts when you're an MSSP. MSSP, Managed Security Services Provider, in case I lost anyone. So they've been doing this for a long time, having to integrate everyone's EDR and cloud and everything into a log server or a SIEM. So those contracts had to be very specific. Those vendors, MSP vendors, don't necessarily care if you have all the capability for XDR. It's not their job to make sure you went to them and you're hiring them to do a product or manage a product or make phone calls. So it's very different from the client and MSSP perspective. So is this sort of what an MSSP can evolve into? Yes. So that's exactly what Agio is trying to do with Agio XDR. But we're taking more of a capability approach. We're looking at this and we're saying, where are the assets that exist in people's networks today? Now we've got containers, we've got SaaS, we have public cloud, private cloud, and then all the traditional stuff too. So we really want to, we don't want to tell you garbage in, garbage out, like it's your fault that your SIM isn't picking anything up. We want to actually detect things. We want to have standards. A little tip for selecting an MSP, have standards. That you want them to have standards and requirements, because if they're looking at it in terms of transactional, you pay us and we give you this thing, or we manage it, or we kick out reports every once in a while, it's not really helping you with all these domains. So we take a capability-based approach. So we build your stack to have a capability-based approach so that we don't blame you for when your security isn't working. Excuse me. So with the capability-based approach, if you don't have something that solves a problem or gives you the capability to detect and respond in certain domains, we'll provide it. Nice hat. So we have to build a functional stack for every single client. So let's think in terms of capabilities. This is by no means an exhaustive list of controls and capabilities that you might want to think of to fulfill these controls. This is sort of just, let's call it the continuum of security controls. So you're thinking about your capability to enforce or to report on or to enable some of these controls to exist. So you probably want to use some sort of matrix for this. I would recommend going through this exercise with all your vendors, especially ones like MSPs. So you can have a good idea of what they're actually going to do for you and what they're not. That's very important. So if you're not aware of it, you can't protect it. Asset management is the first component of capability in terms of being able to enforce these controls. So controls like authentication, principle of least privilege, multi-factor, data backup, your policy for cybersecurity, mapping data, device encryption, secure system configuration, the list goes on and on. You might have BigFix, you might have Kaseya, you might have Landsweeper, just something that will enable you to have the capability to know about all the assets that you have out there, even the ones that you have to actively find that maybe aren't being deployed in a way that you expect. So you got to be aware of it. I think there's a few other products that work in this space. If you don't have it, then we provide it. This is where you're going to enforce some remediation. This might be some automation stuff to deploy software packages. If you can't deploy software packages to endpoints, you've got to get something better, like SCCM even. So if you're measuring it, then you can improve it. You've ever heard the phrase, never measured, never improved. So environmental sensing, I'm sorry, this entire slideshow is just that. Environmental sensing is the way that you can measure the effectiveness of all these controls that you've put on your continuum. You're able to say, yes, we are enforcing authentication at these points. Yes, principle of least privilege. We couldn't escalate privileges with our vulnerability scanner. This is where your vulnerability scanner comes in handy. This is where your IDS, IPS, DLP, all of those things, and some of the packet capture that we're doing, and file reassembly, malware sandbox. That is where the data is being collected from, your environmental sensing capability. And don't overlook your cloud. When you're trying to select a different products to build into a stack that can do this for your specific controls, you got to think about what's in the cloud, how do I get at it, how do I get information about it, how can I discover things that aren't supposed to be there, and how do I actually find a way to enforce some of these controls, or even know that they're being put in place. Endpoint security, that's exactly what you're thinking it is. That's your CrowdStrike, that's your Carbon Black, that's your Silence. These are the people that want to dominate XDR. These are the players that want to be native XDR. Endpoint security, so you can actually enforce most of these, but on a very basic level, this is where all the code is executed. This is where all your humans are spending most of their time. This is where all of your people are reading their emails. This is where they're interacting with company data. They're saving files, they're sending them, they're reading emails, they're sending emails. The buck stops here. So a lot of thought into did I advance accidentally? EDR is where that is really at. So we are looking at data collection analysis. So you need somewhere to put all this data, right? You've got all these systems in your stack. You've got control of your endpoints. You can deploy software. You can scan them. You can see them on the network. You can discover new stuff. So like, where do you put all that? A lot of people call it the single pane of glass I alluded to earlier. You might have heard that 1 or 2 billion times, but it's important to have one place to put all that, because you need the data to be structured, and you need a way to sift through it and maybe look back in time if you discovered something that happened a long time ago. So you've also got to run some algorithms and machine learning, and a lot of SIMs will let you do that. A lot of tools will let you define your own machine learning models. We work with the SIM vendor that we use. It's Stellar Cyber. It's their open XDR platform. We work with them to improve their machine learning because of the relationship we have. But that's by no means the only way you can do that. IBM QRadar does this. Splunk does this. Does Splunk do this? I'm getting a nod. Not XDR. Well, not XDR, but your own machine learning models. Yeah. So this is where you get your baseline on all of these things, like your data mapping and your cybersecurity policy. You're building a baseline. You want to know if there's geographically improbable access. You're writing all your detection rules, or maybe someone's writing them for you. That's us. You probably want to know some potentially interesting checks and balances with your security controls, MFA, conditional access. You might want to know certain patterns around those things. Like, that's unusual and it doesn't indicate a problem, but maybe we should talk to that person and say, what are you doing? And potentially interesting things that you didn't know you wanted to know, like what's the least common Windows logs? It's the I shut down for who knows what reason, or really bad ones like memory allocation failure or something. So you probably also need a way to coordinate your efforts and get alerts and incidents. So this is the system that you'd be looking for to, say, assign an incident, to collect artifacts into an incident, assign it to an analyst, have them put their notes on there, and what they did, if they've responded or if they escalated. And also, this is the system where I'd recommend kicking off your automations from. You don't need a SOAR. You need someone who can write scripts and any basic SIM on the planet to collect all of your data. Well, is it all of your data, though? Not really. We'll talk about that in a minute. Because you should not try to collect all data possible. So this is where we collect our data. This is the Stellar Cyber Open XDR platform. That little loop-de-loop right there is sort of their interpretation of the MITRE attack kill chain, the Lockheed Martin kill chain, and they've mapped everything to MITRE. So everything is pretty much the same except for the loop, because this is supposed to model the actual threat activity. They're going to get a persistent foothold, and they're not going to go and do initial attempts again. They're going to explore, propagate, and then drop another place as a persistent foothold, potentially every time. So this helps us figure out how many loops they went through. That's how many places we have to remediate. And of course, exfil and impact. So it's an interesting take. And I get it a lot of times, well, what do you detect? What's the whole list of rules? Up in the top left, detections.stellarcyber.ai. Most SIMs will have a list of detections, more or less complicated. Interestingly enough, their list, it's actually a web app. You can sort through and filter by data source, data type, tactic, technique, kill chain stage, any of those things. I'm going to skip past all that. I explained it. All right. So there's also booby traps. If you look into, well, actually, first of all, does anyone know what a zero knowledge proof is? Anybody? A zero knowledge proof is where I can prove to you that I know what you wrote on a piece of paper and put into your safe. If I could prove that I know that without saying, here's the combination of the safe and proving that I have access to the safe. So even though I might not show you that I've accessed the safe or do it in front of you, I can look at what you wrote on that piece of paper and you know 100% certainty that I've been in that safe, or that I know someone who's been in that safe and I'm tricking you. So this is where you can cover a ton of different security controls with a very simple concept called canary tokens and honeypots. So at the very simplest layer, a canary token is a DNS web bug or a DNS entry or a web bug that whenever it gets looked up, then you can generate a notification, you can grab browser information. Whoever just scanned that QR code, please update your iOS device. You can cover so many things. Phishing protection, you can have tracking pixels, you can have AWS API keys. Suppose you think someone's getting in your password vault, put some fake API keys in there, you'll find out real quick for AWS. Or Azure. You can also put in Slack API keys, Windows folders, S3 bucket credentials, Office 365 mailbug. And the one that I have a lot of fun with is QR codes, because you can sort of you can take the QR code, you can have a custom domain so it looks like it's your domain. Suppose you wanted to know if someone was in your telecom closet, your telecom room, slap one of those on everything. If someone scans it, then you know someone's been there. It's just a way for the attacker, the threat actor to badge in, and you know it. All kinds of canary tokens. That's just the canary tokens, by the way. The honeypot, you can masquerade as any OS, any network stack, any MAC address. It can contain canary tokens. So how many people have a server called DC01 or company something DC01? So what if company name -DC01 was actually just a honeypot and it was collecting all that information. Jim Shakespeare was giving a half-day training yesterday, which I attended, talking about Active Directory exploits. And at the end of that, I was thinking, wow, we could have gotten almost this far. We could have wasted this much of an attacker's time just by making that a honeypot and choosing Server 2022, the Windows network stack, joining it to the domain, giving it a whole bunch of, let's put an IT folder on there and put psexec64 on there. Except it's not psexec64, it's calc.exe, and we just got a notification when you ran it, when the threat actor is trying to live off the land and runs it. So a lot of cool things you can do with canary tokens and honeypots. And that is one of the ways that we're trying to extract the value out of some of these systems for our clients' security controls continuum. And I really haven't talked about any vendors so far, because you're probably wondering, well, yeah, but what data should I actually collect? Do I need everything from everywhere? Well, no, actually. That's kind of why I pointed towards this detections list. You probably want to know what your SIEM is capable of and what you're actually interested in detecting, because you can't pay enough people to write enough rules to detect everything, and you can't afford for your security analysts, excuse me, your security analysts, I did it again, to be sifting through data they never needed. So I would recommend for operational data, testing your apps, get some other cheaper system to do that, and don't waste a cybersecurity system. Don't waste your XDR platform on operational data that you don't actually have to pay anyone to look at that data. Or sorry, you don't have to pay your security team to look at that data. Okay, so where's the R portion of this? There's XDR, right? It's response, extended detection and response. Well, that's where it really gets dicey. So a lot of these are custom. I mentioned having your single pane of glass to be the place where you're launching automations from and managing incidents from. And that's really where I'd recommend doing this. Find a SIEM that can launch those, and I know a lot do it. I've worked with QRadar for a long time. You can execute scripts. Stellar Cyber, OpenXDR can execute scripts. In fact, you can have the analyst insert parameters to put into scripts to automate, because you don't want your security analysts having access to Active Directory to mess with people's accounts, access to a firewall that they don't manage. You don't want them to have access to things, to do things that are out of their wheelhouse. So that's kind of where automation comes in. I don't know if you noticed, but every single one of these has automation lit up. That's because you can automate all of that. You can automate things that are repeatable processes that help you avoid giving that access to a human. So this is our stack. If you don't have some of these capabilities in terms of Agio XDR, if you don't have these, bring what you have. We'll figure out what you need, and we'll provide that. So hopefully this was interesting to you. I was really enjoying geeking out about the canary tokens, but does anyone have any questions or anything?
How difficult is it to deploy? How difficult is it to deploy canary tokens?
Super easy. What you essentially do is you can choose which one. There's a free, I should start out with, there's a free way to do this. You can do it yourself. Canarytokens.org is their free tokens. You can't put your own put your own domain on those. You can't like join it to a domain, or sorry, you're talking canary tokens. Super easy. You essentially choose what you want, and then you type in a memo to remind yourself, and then you type in an email address to notify. The enterprise version of Thinks Canary is actually what we're using under the hood for this, and they'll let you customize everything about it. The domain, the link, it can be an image, it can be a QR code, it can be a slow redirect, so it grabs browser information and then sends them to somewhere else. I use that everywhere. I have these everywhere. In my car, in my car console, there's a full sheet printout of a QR code that said, I just wrote Bitcoin on it, just in case anyone's rifling through my car. I've got one on the bottom of my laptop and on my phone. You know, imagine getting an email for, you know, your phone going through, you know, some security, you know. They're super easy. Write a memo. Yeah. It works by DNS. So so the way they do it is they create a DNS entry for a hostname.o3n.io is actually their default domain. And if someone makes a DNS query to look up that host, you get an alert. Same thing with like the honeypot works in a very similar way. It actually uses DNS tunneling to communicate with the console. So that can set off some of our alerts. But essentially, it almost doesn't even have to have valid network configuration because it can ARP and it can get that DNS out even if it doesn't have the right gateway, or the right subnet mask, or you know, it can get it out. So it's really clever, and half their file tokens work that way too. You know, it creates a unique DNS, and once you look it up, it fires, and often gives extra information. Yeah. Any other questions? Nice to see Curtis. Yeah, that's where it does get dicey. So sometimes all you have to do is write an API connector. That's how some of that data gets into the Stellar Cyber platform other than logs. But if it's logs that are just in a flat file, they have an agent where you can get that. You can have this system, you know, it depends on how it's structured. If it's already JSON, then you just point the agent, the log collection agent at that, and it gets in there. On the Stellar Cyber side, they do have to write a parser for that, and they are fairly on top of it. It varies, though, I will say. Yeah, I know it's painful to write custom parsers or DSMs for QRadar and some for Splunk too, but you know, it's that's something that we rely more on the vendor to do. So it's kind of more like an Alien Vault situation. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, if you're interested in chatting more about it, I'll be up here for a few more minutes. You can come get my card. I have some other people with me that are down at the booth. There's an Agio booth next to check-in. Come check us out. I would love to geek out more about honeypots and canary tokens and stacks. All right, thank you.